I haven't seen any polling on this in California, but my guess is that there are everyday Californians who are looking at what's going on in Arizona with their immigration law, where essentially they're trying to enforce, they are going to enforce now the federal code, which wasn't being enforced by the feds. There are a lot of people here in California looking at that thinking, boy, we could sure use something like that in this state, Chuck, but is there any move in Sacramento towards immigration reform in this state?
Oh, heavens no. The battle in California is over how much more public funds to provide people who are living here illegally. That's the battlefield that we have in California. A few years back, for example, there was a proposal in the budget to add about $300 or $400 million for special health and welfare programs for people here illegally. I fought that, and as did other Republicans. And we were able to get that removed from the budget. And the reason why it was so important to fight that is that if you follow federal rules, the federal government will typically reimburse us quite a bit. For example, if we spend $2, the federal government may reimburse $1 of that too for some of our welfare programs. But if you go outside federal rules, and if you provide benefits above and beyond what the federal government says you can, and especially if you're providing benefits to people here illegally, the federal government says, not so fast, we won't reimburse you for that. And so this proposal from the Democrats to spend $300 or $400 million more was actually to reimburse counties like Los Angeles County and some of the Bay Area counties who were on their own providing their local tax dollars to people who are here illegally and then wanted to get reimbursed by the state for doing what is frankly not appropriate.
Wow. Can you stay with us one more segment? Because I heard you this weekend at the Eagle Forum Convention talk about the California Air Resources Board, and you really put it in terms that I've never thought of before. I think you're going to grip our audience quite well with this one. Can you stick around?
Sure thing.
Excellent. Chuck DeVore, Assemblyman, with us on KSFO.
You're listening to Brian Sussman on Hot Talk 560 KSFO.
Assemblyman Chuck DeVore taking time out of his busy schedule to stay with us for a few more minutes here on KSFO. This weekend, I heard you speak at the Eagle Forum, Phyllis Schlafly's great event in San Diego, and you explained this unelected bureaucracy, CARB, the California Air Resources Board, in ways in which I've never heard it explained, and it resonated with all of us, and it speaks volumes as to what's going on in the United States of America. Could you go through that for our audience right now?
Well, sure thing, Brian. It's basically called the administrative state, and it's a legacy of the progressive left or statists. Basically, 130 years ago, some folks out of Princeton University under the leadership of Woodrow Wilson had a sharp critique of the U.S. Constitution, saying that it was an obsolete document from an agrarian era and that we needed to update it and become more like our European friends. And the theory was that instead of three branches of government designed to protect our unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, three branches of government being the legislative, executive, and judicial, kind of balanced off against each other to prevent a dangerous concentration of power and then further divided between the federal and the state levels of government. Instead of that, they hypothesized that we should have two branches, effectively, the political and the administrative. The political would have your elected leaders, and what they would do is draft broad, sweeping legislation that would empower unelected bureaucracies with highly trained technocrats, civil servants who would do the right thing because they were so well trained, and these individuals would be insulated from public pressure. They'd be insulated from politics. And you see this concept in full flower with the California Air Resources Board, which among its other tasks has been tasked with implementing AB 32, California's global greenhouse gas reduction law that I voted against back in 2006. AB 32 says we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in California by 30% in only 10 years. Now, this is a tall order. If you got rid of all electrical production, you'd only make about a 20% number reduction. If you got rid of all privately owned automobiles, you wouldn't make the number. So this is going to be a very tough thing to do. So what the politicians do to kind of insulate themselves from public anger and pressure is they empower these unelected bureaucracies like the Air Resources Board with enormous powers that actually take on the aspects of all three branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial. And let me give your listeners one specific example. About a month ago, the Air Resources Board decided to cancel a regulation that they were working on that would have required metallicized windows on vehicles sold in California. The theory being that a metallicized coating would reduce the air conditioning load for the vehicle during the summer, and less air conditioning use would mean less greenhouse gas emissions. Now, there's some practical problems with this. For example, your cell phone would have a difficult time working in such a car so equipped. People who have to wear GPS bracelets, those would have a difficult time working in those vehicles. But nevertheless, this was a proposed regulation. Now, when you think about it, proposing such a regulation really mimics the sort of duties that I have as a state assemblyman. I could draft a bill that would do exactly that. But that's my job as a lawmaker. But instead, you have the Air Resources Board proposing what amounts to be a bill. Then they decide on their own whether they want to approve that or cancel it, basically mimicking the job of the governor when he would veto or sign a bill into law. And then, of course, if you have a problem, if you as a citizen have a problem with that bill because maybe you're a car dealer or perhaps you enjoy using your cell phone in your vehicle and you want to complain about that legislation, that regulation, the entity that you would first go to complain to would, in fact, be the Air Resources Board. So they would, in essence, be their own judicial review. So what you find in drafting regulations is that the Air Resources Board, an unelected body, is taking on the power of all three branches of government combined into one unelected bureaucracy. Well, this is an example of what's known as the administrative state. And that's one of the reasons why California is ranked by Forbes magazine as having the 50th, just the worst possible business climate in the country. We're number 50 out of 50 because of our combination, a toxic combination of high taxes and enormous amounts of red tape through our out-of-control bureaucracies.
Wow, and you think about that, Chuck DeVore, it's not just in this state, but we also see the same thing within aspects of the federal government. I'm thinking specifically of the Environmental Protection Agency.
Well, absolutely. EPA does a lot of the same things that California's Air Resources Board does, and you saw this last year when they used the Clean Air Act to just declare carbon dioxide a toxic gas, when in fact, of course, it's a very useful molecule used by plants to spur on plant growth. But in so declaring carbon dioxide a toxic gas, it gave them then the right under the Clean Air Act to start to regulate it. And I frankly think they did that because Barbara Boxer's legislative attempt to enact cap and trade stalled, and then it was passed over to John Kerry, and that attempt stalled, and they're trying to get it started again. So rather than wait for a law to be duly passed by the elected representatives of the people of this nation, they just decided to use the Environmental Protection Agency to accomplish the same thing without a vote.
Wow. Chuck DeVore, thanks for spending some time with us. I know you're extremely busy, and keep fighting for us in Sacramento. And again, appreciate you spending this amount of time with us. And it was great to see you this weekend in San Diego. Had an opportunity to meet your wife and your lovely kids. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much.
All right. That's Assemblyman Chuck DeVore here on KSFO.